that I forgot to introduce myself for those who don't know me. I'm Janine Van Dam, and I'm the Relief Society president in the Ralston La Vista Ward. And so our presidency, as we were talking about what we could do for activities during this kind of crazy time of COVID, we felt impressed to spend some time learning about the different aspects of depression. We just feel like it's such a pervasive struggle in our time, whether it's something that's situational or seasonal, or if it's a diagnosis of major depressive disorder. We just feel like probably most sisters' lives have been touched in some way by depression, whether it's ourselves or someone that we know or love. And also we felt that for many, this struggle might have been compounded by the changes that have come with this pandemic over the last 6 or 7 months. Sorry, my sister's trying to FaceTime me. So as I tried to impress on the sisters in our ward as we were spreading the word about this presentation, we just thought it would be useful to have some insight, even if it's not something that you yourself struggle with. We thought it would be good to have some insight to help reach out to somebody that you know who may be struggling, whether that's a family member or a friend or a sister that you minister to. And we are planning to record this tonight. And so we would just encourage you, if there's somebody that you know who wanted to attend but wasn't able to, or there's someone that you feel impressed to share this presentation with, please reach out either to myself or to Robin, who I know can't be here tonight. And we can make sure that we get that information to you. So with that being said, let me go ahead and introduce our presenter. So many of you may know her, Sister Jennifer Breinholt. She's a member of our Ralston La Vista Ward, but has some Papillion Ward roots, is from what I understand. Is that right?
Before this ward, we were in the Papillion Ward, when they split. But before the Papillion Ward, we were actually in the Ralston La Vista Ward.
Okay, all right. So you got roots in both places. Awesome. So she has a master's degree in counseling and psychology. She's worked in a county mental health facility along with some time with LDS Family Services. She's currently a full-time faculty member at Metro Community College, trying to navigate the world of teaching during COVID. She teaches psychology there. So we're going to give her some time to present to us, and then at the end we'll have some time for some questions as well. So with that, I will turn the time over to Jennifer.
Great. Well, thanks. So, I think tonight is a good time to have our presentation. When I first mentioned that I could do this on the 29th, I didn't realize that the debates were going on. Had I known about the debates, I might have scheduled it for a different time. But you know what? This is also a good way to get out of all of that conflict and stuff. So we're going to take a little break from that. And if you like the debate and the chaos that ensues, I guess there's 2 other debates, so you won't miss out. So with that, I'd like to share with you a PowerPoint. This is a presentation that I worked on. I've given this presentation a couple of times, and every time I give it, I learn something new. I'm hoping that this will be beneficial to you guys. It's a timely subject, not just because we're in the pandemic, but I think, women are more likely to be diagnosed with depression than men. It doesn't mean that men don't have feelings and that they don't get depressed too. It's just that women, it's more noticeable, I guess you could say. And certainly, parts of our culture, of our LDS culture might, if you don't understand, we'll talk about misunderstanding the doctrine and how that can relate to depression. So I think this is, I hope that this is a useful presentation for you guys. When Stephanie sent out the email, when was it, a couple of days ago, it had not just the flyer to this presentation and not just the Zoom link, but it also had 2 attachments. One attachment was an outline of this presentation, and it had all of my sources. So if any of you are interested, you want to review it after this, you want to kind of go over maybe go back and talk and kind of rethink about some of these topics, that email has that outline on there, and it has some of my sources. And then I have an attachment on that email about some thinking patterns that people have that get us into trouble and lead us to feeling depressed. So, so anyway, those are in that email. So I wanted to start talking about what depression is, to define it. Before we get into what it is, I want to talk about what it is not. What depression is not, and depression is not evidence of sin. If you have been sinning, you feel crummy, right? That's your guilt, but that's not major depression. That's not clinical depression. That's not depression. That's evidence of sin is something else. So sometimes when people feel depressed, they think, oh, I must be doing something wrong in my life because this is why I feel so crummy. And it could be, but you're probably a pretty good person, and that depression is not evidence of sin. What depression is not, it is not a sign of weakness. I hear a lot of people say things like, if I was just stronger, I could cope better with these issues in my life. And you're coping. You may not be coping the way that you think you should be coping, but you're doing it. You're surviving. You may be dog paddling in the lake, but you're there. So depression is not a sign of weakness. You're still there. Depression is not a sign of ingratitude. We hear people say things like, if I wasn't, all depressed people, all they have to do is just be grateful. If they could just be grateful, then they won't be depressed. And we'll actually hopefully we'll have time talking about the benefits of things like a gratitude journal. But just because you're depressed does not mean that you don't recognize that you have good things in your life. Depression is not satanic possession. And again, all of these pieces here are found in that handout with the sources, and all of these are from LDS.org. On LDS.org, you can find articles that say people who are depressed, it is not. It is not satanic possession. Does Satan work on us? Absolutely. But he does not cause us to have mental illness. So this is what depression is not. This is what depression is. There's three clusters of symptoms. The first cluster has to do with our emotions. So obviously we might feel sad, but we might feel apathetic. So apathy is just where you just don't care about things anymore. Things that used to make you happy, you can't find happiness in it anymore. So maybe you were somebody who used to really enjoy reading. You could get lost in a book, but now you just can't find a good book anymore. Irritability. So maybe you don't recognize that you're sad, but you notice, and the people around you notice, that you're very irritable. You yell at people a lot. Maybe you have road rage. You yell at your kids a lot. You're short-tempered. That irritability could actually be a sign that you're depressed. Irrational guilt. I'm not talking about rational guilt when you do something wrong, but I've known of people who were so depressed that they felt guilty just for breathing air or eating food. They would say things like, I'm such a bad person eating food. I shouldn't be eating food because people who are more worthwhile than I should be eating this food. They feel guilty just for being alive. Or they feel guilty for things that aren't their fault. They take on responsibilities that aren't theirs. Feeling worthless, right? Another cluster of symptoms for depression is our thoughts. We might be consumed with thoughts of death or suicide. We might have some thinking problems, ineffective thinking patterns. We might have all or nothing thinking, where we think all or nothing thinking is where it's either this or it's that. So either I'm a success or I'm a failure, or either I'm always this way or I'm never that way. That all or nothing thinking is a type of perfectionism, and that gets us into trouble. Because is anybody perfect? No, nobody's perfect. So all the time that you're spending trying to become perfect, you're just beating your head against the wall because you want to become perfect, but it's not happening, and you get depressed as a result, and you go into despair. So you might have really indecisive thoughts. Maybe you go to Hy-Vee and you're in their checkout line, and they're saying, do you want paper or plastic? And you think to yourself, well, if I get a paper bag, then I'll be responsible for knocking down a tree somewhere in a forest, and it'll be my fault because I ordered a paper bag. But if I get a plastic bag, then that plastic will have harder time recycling. So I don't know which is best, paper or plastic. I just can't think. Problems thinking clearly. So I've known of people who are depressed, and they will say things like, I just can't think anymore. They'll talk about how for them, they're thinking, I've heard somebody say, it's like I'm thinking through oatmeal, right? The wheels just aren't turning in their head. They're just having problems thinking clearly. They have a hard time focusing or paying attention. They'll read a book, and when they get to the end of the book, they can't tell you what they just read because their attention wanders. They're thinking about the things that they're depressed about, or they're just having a hard time focusing. A lot of times people have problems with their memory, and they think, oh no, especially if they're a certain age, they think I'm having a hard time remembering things. Maybe it's Alzheimer's. And it could be, but probably more likely it might be depression. Depression can have you have problems with your memory. So depression has to do with our emotions, it has to do with our thinking, and it has to do with our behaviors. So we might experience depression as appetite weight or appetite change. So maybe we eat more than we used to, or maybe we eat less than we used to. People who are you can tell when somebody's depression is really, really bad when they don't even get pleasure in food, right? Because sometimes people overeat when they're depressed as a way to, comfort food or to fill the emptiness inside or to find some happiness. If they're able to at least find happiness in food, that's better than the person who doesn't even find happiness in food. So if you lose your appetite, if nothing tastes good anymore, if it just tastes like cardboard to you, then that could be a sign that your depression is getting bad. Related to an appetite change, you might have a weight change. You might have sleep problems. So maybe you sleep too much as a way to cope with your depression. I've known of people who will say things like, at least when I sleep, I can escape. I don't have to think about my depressing life. And when I'm sleeping, maybe I'll have a good dream. And that for them, sleep serves as an escape. For them, sleep is their drug of choice. Other people, they can't get to sleep. They lay in bed and their mind is really active and they're thinking about all these things that are stressful and things that are depressing, and they can't get to sleep. Or they get to sleep and then they wake up a couple of hours early, and it's like their body doesn't feel rested. It's like they just barely laid down. Nothing happened in terms of sleep. So they might have sleep problems. They might self-harm. So, things like cutting or other kinds of self-harm ways. People self-harm for a lot of reasons. It could be because they feel so bad about themselves inside, and so they want to punish themselves. It could be a cry for help. Maybe they don't know how to ask for help effectively, so they self-harm in hopes of drawing people to them. Maybe they self-harm as a way to feel alive. Maybe they feel so dead inside that self-harm makes them feel something. So there's a lot of different reasons why people might self-harm. Substance abuse. We tend to think that, as Latter-day Saints, we live the word of wisdom, so we're not going to abuse substances. And, that's something that we don't have to worry about. So that would be nice if just being a Mormon insulated you from all of that. I've known a lot of LDS people who abuse substances. It started out with pain meds, pain pills, and it just kind of builds from there. So those are some three clusters of symptoms of depression. Do you guys have any questions about this so far, or thoughts as I'm going through? Does this sound familiar to people that you've known who've been depressed, these symptoms? Yeah.
I
So,
just have a question. Oh,
oh, go ahead. Yeah.
I have a question about the terminology because, and tell me if this is right. I mean, there's depression. I mean, maybe you don't call it depression. You can be depressed for a certain reason and
Right.
for a certain amount of time, but do you not call it depression until it hits those 2 weeks? And
Yeah, so with depression, to be diagnosed with clinical major depression, you have to have these symptoms for at least 2 weeks. It's normal to feel depressed, like if somebody passed away, that's kind of normal, very typical. It's normal to be depressed because you know your dog dies or something. It's not normal to be depressed, or when your depression gets out of the realm of normalcy. So
so,
yeah.
for terms, you'd say, I mean, would you distinguish clinical depression versus
Right.
situational depression? Or
Yeah, that's the problem with our language, is that we use the same term depression to mean clinical depression, you know, major depression, or we use the same term depression for, you know, I forgot to buy ice cream and so I'm really depressed, which isn't the same thing, but we use those same words interchangeably and it's really unfortunate. So, but yeah, a lot of it's kind of important to realize when this is getting to be an issue. So yeah, good point. Other thoughts or questions? Okay, so we've got the thoughts, we've got the feelings, we've got the behaviors. Now we know what depression is. Some of the other things that could cause depression. Remember how I said depression is not a sign of weakness? It's not this, it's not that. There are some things that could lead us to feel depressed that aren't necessarily true depression. So some things could be, some medical conditions could lead to depression. So things like thyroid problems, medication side effects, you know, going on the birth control pill. For some people, you know, I've been on the pill and it didn't cause me to be depressed, but some people take the pill and it gets them depressed. Brain trauma, traumatic brain injury, they are at risk for having depression. Multiple sclerosis, dementia like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's can have depression as a piece of it. So, you know, it could be heart problems. So maybe, you know, maybe you're not really depressed. Maybe you've got a tumor. So, you know, there's other things that could be causing us to be depressed. So if you're starting to feel kind of crummy, don't just say to yourself, oh, you know what, it's just depression. You know, I'm going on month 4 and I don't need to get treatment for it because it's just depression. Certainly get it checked out, because maybe your misery could be taken care of by putting you on different medications, or, you know, maybe they could check your thyroid or other kinds of issues. So, you know, just don't assume that it's just one thing. It could be caused by a physical condition as well. So yeah, good point. All right. So these are some medical conditions that could cause depression. Oh, chronic fatigue syndrome, anemia. Are women at risk for anemia? Absolutely, right? And those kinds of things. Fibromyalgia could be related to depression as well. So again, if you're feeling some symptoms, don't assume that this is nothing. You know, maybe you need a blood test, maybe, you know, to kind of rule out anemia, or your doctor can take a look at your meds and see what's going on. There's also some psychological disorders that also include depression. So things like post-traumatic stress disorder has depression as a piece of it. Bipolar disorder is where you have mood swings between depression and mania. And that could have some depression to it. Borderline personality disorder, if you're not familiar with that, that's a disorder where people have, you know, they're smart, they're creative, but they have a really hard time with relationships. They have a hard time understanding themselves. They get depressed easily. They're very emotional, sensitive kinds of folks. And depression can be a part of borderline personality disorders. Anxiety disorders, it's thought that anxiety and depression are two sides of the same coin. It's thought that anxiety is just depression with energy. So anxiety disorders, you know, things like generalized anxiety disorder where you're just anxious all the time. Maybe underneath that you have a lot of depression. Postpartum depression. Are LDS women, are we at risk for postpartum depression? Are we a fertile group usually? Yes. And so we are a group of people that are at risk for postpartum depression. Now, some of you may have heard that like Utah has a really high rate of prescribed antidepressants. Does that mean that being LDS makes you depressed? Does that mean that living in Utah makes you depressed? No, it means that you might be at greater risk for postpartum depression. And so you're getting help, which is a good thing. It could be lots of other reasons for that. Postpartum psychosis. Postpartum psychosis is like postpartum depression, except you have the depression, but you also have some psychotic stuff. So you might be hearing things that aren't there. You might be believing things that aren't true. Schizophrenia has a lot of depression underlying it as well. So you can have all of these things and that can lead to depression. So if you have depressive symptoms, certainly get it treated because you're not a bad person for having these symptoms. It doesn't mean that you're weak. In fact, it's a sign of strength to get help. And if you go to a doctor, they're going to want to rule out some of these other things to be able to help you out the best. All right. Any thoughts about this so far? Not so much. Okay, cool. So I wanted to talk about some causes of depression. There's lots of different reasons why people get depressed. One is biological. Depression has a strong biological piece to it. So we might have a genetic predisposition towards depression. When I make my PowerPoint slides, I will go onto Google and I will Google image a word or a phrase. And I Google imaged the word Gene. And this guy popped up. I guess his name is Gene. So Gene is responsible for our depression. So it could be that we have a genetic predisposition towards depression. Now, back in the day, your grandparents, they may not have been really open about their depression, but maybe you had to tiptoe on eggshells around them. And that's how they showed their depression. Maybe they didn't talk about their feelings because that's not what they talked about back then. But maybe they drank a lot, and that could be a sign of depression. Or maybe they were just really dissatisfied with life. So they may not have, your grandparents or whoever may not have talked about their depression, but there's some signs that something was afoot. You might have a chemical imbalance. Neurotransmitters are chemical messengers inside our brain. And serotonin is one that's found really throughout the body, but serotonin is known as the pleasure chemical. It allows us to feel happy. So every time somebody says to you, hey, you look nice today, right? Serotonin is released in your brain. And so then you say, oh, thanks, that makes me feel good when you say, I look nice today, right? So every time something good happens, serotonin is released. A compliment, we find a donut that the kids didn't eat, right? Anything like that releases serotonin. Now, in the brains of people who are depressed, they don't have that. So you might say to them, hey, you look nice today. And the serotonin just isn't doing its job. So the person doesn't feel pleasure. So if you've ever tried to try to cheer up somebody who's depressed, hey, you look nice today, right? For them, they just hear the words, it doesn't sink in. And the reason why it doesn't sink in is because that serotonin isn't being released. So they could have, you could have a genetic predisposition towards having that chemical imbalance. Or you could just have the chemical imbalance without it necessarily being genetic. You could also have brain differences. People who are depressed tend to show not just chemical differences, but brain differences. In our brains, there's a structure right behind our forehead, the frontal lobe. People who are depressed, sometimes this area of their frontal lobe is abnormal, which means that they ruminate. So they think about negative things constantly. They blame themselves constantly. They can't get out of their own guilt. So it's like their brain is just predisposed to just ruminate, to think over and over and over and over and over and over about things. And it's because this little part of their brain, for some people who are depressed, is overactive. There's other brain differences. The amygdala is a little structure deep inside the brain. It's about the size of like a pencil eraser, maybe a little bit bigger than that. And some people have an abnormal amygdala. The amygdala is a structure that helps to produce emotions. And the amygdala, half of the amygdala deals with unpleasant emotions like anxiety and aggression and things like that, and depression. The other half of the amygdala deals with that same negative stuff, but it also deals with some positive. So you got a whole bunch of negative here, and on this side you've got negative and positive. So we are actually biologically predisposed to focus on the negative. So that sounds really depressing, like, well, heck, even my brain is against me. This is why we focus on the negative so much, because our brain is predisposed to notice those negative things.
Jennifer, is that like a survival thing, or?
Yeah, exactly. It's like an evolutionary thing. So
Okay.
back in the day when we lived in tribes and we lived in caves, the cavemen whose amygdala noticed all the negative things, they survived. So those cavemen would be out walking along in the meadow and they notice the saber-toothed tiger and they run away, or they beat up the saber-toothed tiger. They do something because they're focused on the negative. They're focused on the threat. Compare that with the other caveman who's in that same meadow and they notice the butterflies. They're a happy lot, those people who notice the butterflies, but they get eaten by the tiger. So it's a good thing that we have that negativity bias, but it's also a bad thing because we get stuck, we get focusing on the negative all the time. So it's like we're biologically primed for that. So if you're somebody who notices the negative all the time, give yourself a break and realize it's not your fault, it's your ancestors. Had they just noticed the fly, you wouldn't be in this mess, but then you wouldn't be here. But so yeah, there's actual brain structure differences. So hormonal changes, this is part of the biological thing. Here's like a little illustration of when we have our menstrual cycles. You can see that during our cycle, our estrogen goes up and then it dips. The progesterone goes up and then it dips. Correspondingly, our serotonin goes up and it dips. It goes up and it dips. And so you can see that as our hormones change, our emotions change. As our estrogen and progesterone change, that can affect our serotonin. So any kind of hormonal changes, we know of hormonal changes like with puberty and having our period and being menopausal, that can cause hormonal changes. The very act of nursing causes hormonal changes. Being pregnant, the very act of labor and delivery causes hormonal changes. So there's all kinds of things that could lead us to feeling depressed, and it's not because we're bad people or that we're weak. There could be other valid reasons for that. Unrelated to biology, but kind of related to biology, is childhood trauma and abuse. So you know how when you read to a kid, and you have them play with educational toys. You do that because you want to mold their brain to be able to enjoy reading. You want to mold their brain for intelligence, right? That's why you read to them. That's why you have them play with educational toys instead of, parking them in front of the TV 24/7. You do things so that the kids' brains will be molded for good. You can mold your kids' brains for bad. So negative experiences like childhood trauma and abuse can actually mold the brain. So you can predispose a child to be depressed when they're an adult just by having them experience trauma. It could be abuse. It could be that they're not actually being touched, but it could be that they are witnessing domestic violence. Just witnessing domestic violence is enough to cause brain changes. This is it's kind of a bad picture, but it's kind of fuzzy. It's not terribly clear, but you can see that in the healthy brain, this is the brain of a kid that didn't experience abuse and trauma. And the orange and the reds areas are lit up. That brain is functioning, it's working well. This is the frontal lobe that has to do with managing our emotions. It has to do with planning and basic personality. In the abused brain, this is not where the person experienced brain trauma, like, head through the wall kind of thing. They witnessed trauma, or they just got beat up, but it didn't. In other words, you can have brain trauma without actually somebody punching you in the brain. So you can mold somebody's brain to be depressed. So childhood trauma and abuse can mold people to slip into that depression easily, because that's what their brain is used to. Just like reading to your kid forms your kid's brain for the good, abuse can form your kid's brain for the bad. All right. Another thing that can cause depression is the way that we think. Like I said before, all or nothing thinking, where we think something always has to be perfect. I have to have perfect attendance. I have to be perfect at my scripture study. I have to be perfect as a parent. I have to be perfect as a spouse. All that perfectionism, that just is guaranteed depression. I have never known a perfectionist who was happy. Jumping to conclusions, where people say to themselves, oh, if I'm not even going to bother doing X, Y, and Z because I just know it's not going to turn out right. They kind of jump to conclusions. Disqualifying the positive. So this could be where you focus on the negative all the time, and whenever anything positive does happen, you disqualify it. So it could be somebody says, hey, you look nice today, and you automatically respond with, oh, you're just saying that, right? That's a great way to disqualify the positive. It makes the other person not want to compliment you anymore, and it's as if they never said the positive thing. So and we'll talk about therapy and how therapy can be beneficial, but one thing in therapy that can be helpful is to help people to stay focused on the positive, even though we might have learned ineffective thought patterns growing up. Maybe our brain is hypersensitive to the negative, but there's ways that we can force ourselves to stay focused on the positive, and we'll get into that. This ineffective thought patterns is one of the handouts that was attached to that email. So if you're interested, you could go back to that email and print it up. And I've got my sources on there as well of good books to read about ineffective thinking patterns. Comparing yourself to others. Do Latter-day Saint women ever do that? Yes, we put people up on pedestals and say, oh, that person's always got it together. We look at pictures of other people on Facebook, and we look at their clean houses and their perfect vacations, and that's just guaranteed. I've never known anybody who compares themselves to others who's actually happy. And then there's other ineffective thought patterns that are on that handout as well. We could be depressed because of grief. We could be depressed because somebody passes away. because we are lonely. Does COVID lend itself to loneliness? Absolutely. I'm not an extrovert, but for people who are extroverts, I understand that this is a really tough time for those of you who are just people. Loss of dreams. You know, we don't always think about this, but maybe our dream was to be married, or maybe our dream was to have kids, or maybe our dream was to go into business for ourselves, and maybe our dream was, you know, any of these things, and they turned out differently, and that's a grief. Marriage problems, life stage changes. So some of the changes of life could be becoming an adult. For kids in their, when I say kids, it's because I'm no longer in my 20s. It's been a long time since I've been in my 20s, but for people who are in their 20s, becoming an adult is scary. Having a new baby, you love the baby, you look forward to having the baby, but this is a life stage change where you need to be delicate with yourself because you're getting used to all these different things, and it can lead to depression. Parenting teens can lend itself to depression because teenagers are, they're completely illogical to me. New career. So, you know, maybe it's a job that you look forward to, but it's a life stage change. Any kind of change like that can lend itself to depression. Getting a job promotion, retirement, empty nest. Boy, that's a tough one when the kids move out, and you're all, again, that could be like a loss of dream kind of a thing. Moving, that is a life stage change. So all of these things can lend themselves to depression. So when we're going through these things, be gentle with ourselves and realize, hey, you know, I'm going through a tough time right now. It's okay that I'm not feeling like Mary Poppins. It's okay that I'm having a tough time. That's all right. You know, I'm going through a tough time. Anybody would have a tough time, you know, going through these grief stages. You could misunderstand the doctrine. A lot of times we grow up hearing certain messages that just aren't true, or we read the scriptures and we misunderstand them, or we do. So it's not the doctrine, it's our misunderstanding of it. Perfectionism. You know that scripture, be ye therefore perfect, Matthew 5:48. That scripture is not talking about how we have to be perfect, especially not overnight. We read that scripture and we think, oh, I have to be perfect. I'm commanded to be perfect. But if you look at in the scriptures, it has a little footnote under perfect. And I think it's of Greek derivation. I'm not sure, but the original is be therefore whole, or be therefore complete. And we can become whole and complete through Christ. We cannot ever become perfect by ourselves. So perfectionism is thinking I have to be perfect. And understanding the doctrine is realizing you can't be perfect. You need Christ to help you to become complete and whole. The idea that sorrow is always from sin, that would be fun, wouldn't it? I mean, all we'd have to do is keep the commandments and then we'd always be happy. But I bet you guys know a lot of people who keep the commandments and they're still struggling, maybe with depression. Sorrow doesn't always come from sin. If you are obedient, you will always be happy. That's kind of related to that one. You know, that would be nice because then there wouldn't be any need for therapists. There wouldn't be any need for psychiatric hospitals or anything like that, or medications. It would just be obedient and you'll be happy. And that doesn't always work, like we learned about with the brain. You know, the brain sometimes makes us or leads us to not being terribly happy sometimes. So it may not have anything to do with our obedience. We might believe there's only one way to be a good Mormon. There's only one good way. There's only one way to be a good Latter-day Saint. Only one way to be a good missionary, right? Only one way to be a good mom. And there's lots of different ways to be a good mom or a good missionary or a good, you know, fill in the blank. All you need to feel better is a blessing, more prayer, etc. If it were me, I would counsel the person, do the spiritual stuff. Read your scriptures, go to church, get a blessing, pray, go to the temple, do those things, and do the other stuff. get the, if you need medications, get the medications, get exercise, eat right, see a therapist. So I wouldn't say that all you need to feel better are these things. I would say definitely have those things, but not at the, you wouldn't say to somebody with cancer, well, you have cancer, all you need is a priesthood blessing and you'll get over your cancer, right? We would say get a priesthood blessing and, make sure that you're in good contact with your doctor and get medical help as well. The idea that willpower is equal to happiness, that we can just will ourselves into being happy. The idea that mental illness is always somebody's fault. And like we saw in the brain, sometimes the brain is just the brain. Sometimes that guy, Gene, he messed us up, right? So it's not necessarily somebody's fault. It just is. This is one that I think a lot of Latter-day Saints struggle with. I know that I struggled with this, especially when I was a missionary. The idea that you are responsible for the eternal life of others, right? You get it into your head that I have to be the perfect missionary. I have to be the perfect spouse, to save my husband. I have to be the perfect parent to save my kids. You are responsible. You are not responsible for the eternal life of others. You do your best, but then Christ steps in and he does the rest. Does that make sense? I don't want this as, we need to do our best, but it's not up to us to save others. So we do our best and we let Jesus take over. So these things help us, they lend us to misunderstanding the doctrine lends it to depression. And we are not responsible for the eternal life of others. Christ is. We do our best. We love people. We guide them. We do everything that we can. But, Heavenly Father has a plan for other people. He has a plan for our kids. He has a plan for our investigators. And all he asks is that we just do our best, not be perfect, but just do our best. So those are some things that could lead us to feeling depressed. I want to talk about treatment. If it's biological treatment, medications can be helpful. Exercise. When I Google imaged exercise, I got all these pictures of these thin, gorgeous women who don't really even need to exercise. And then I found this lady and I thought I would exercise with her. She's got the flappy arms and she's sweating, but look at her. She's happy, right? She's not perfect. She's happy. And I just thought, yeah, cool. There's actually studies that show that aerobic exercise especially helps us to have improved mood. So walking around the neighborhood, eating healthy, certain foods can cause serotonin changes in your body. Good sleep, not too much, not too little. Psychotherapy, so seeing a counselor. If you were abused, psychotherapy can help you to think differently about the trauma and the abuse. It can help you to learn better ways of thinking, more effective ways of thinking. That's called cognitive therapy, where you're looking at people's thoughts. And cognitive therapy alone, just talking about your issues, can actually reform the brain. So we saw those slides, or those pictures where if you traumatize a child, you can form their brain for the bad, form their brain for the bad. You can form your brain for the good with effective therapy. So here's a depressed brain. You can see that it's not lit up. It's just kind of ho-hum, kind of a blah kind of a brain. But with therapy, just talk therapy alone, you can see some brain changes. So psychotherapy can be really helpful. I wouldn't do just meds or just therapy. You might need both. A good therapist will respect all beliefs. Sometimes, as Latter-day Saints, we have issues that we kind of wonder if our non-member therapist is going to understand. Would they really understand why a mission is so stressful? Do they really understand what it's like when our kids say, I'm not going to do church anymore? Would a therapist really understand that? And you might have to do some educating of your therapist. You might have to say, You know, I know this might be unusual for you, but in our church, the teenagers go to seminary, not to study to be a priest, but they go to seminary in the morning, like at 6 o'clock in the morning, and they get religious instruction. And it's an, you know, an academically stimulating environment, but there's also peers there, you know, friends, and it's kind of expected that the teenagers will go to that. And so when my kid says, I don't want to do this anymore, this is really difficult for me when I hear that from my kids. So you might have to educate your therapist. But a good therapist will respect you. They may not have the same beliefs as you, but they will respect you. So just like a good physician should respect a Muslim and their dietary differences, a good physician will respect, you know, a Jewish person and their beliefs. A good therapist will respect you. Now, if you get a therapist who's disrespectful, it's like getting a plumber who's disrespectful. You know, fire them and go find somebody else. So a good therapist will treat your beliefs with respect. So how do you help somebody who's depressed? What you can do is, first, you got to take care of yourself. You got to learn about depression, the myths and the facts. You don't want to perpetuate any myths. Have strong boundaries. Take care of yourself and your family first. So if you've got somebody in your life who's depressed, you got to take care of yourself and your family. It's kind of like this graphic from Flying on a Plane. When they say that when you run out of oxygen, you put the mask on you first, and then you help the kid. And why do they say to take care of yourself first? Isn't that being selfish, taking care of yourself first? Why do you have to take care of yourself first?
So you're not passed out on the plane and can't help anybody.
Yeah, you can't help anybody. So you have to take care of yourself first. You have to take care of your family. Remember that you are not responsible for fixing somebody. You cannot fix their depression. This expression here, I don't want you to save me. I want you to stand by my side as I save myself. This is really hard for those of us who are moms, because we feel like I have to fix my kids' misery. And remember that you can't do it. You can be there for them. You can stand with them. You can do your best, but there's things that are out of your control. We don't like to think about that. We don't like to think there's things that are out of my control. We like to think I can fix everything, but that's not true. Remember that you can't fix anybody. You can be there for them. What you can do for the loved one, you can listen. You know, avoid giving advice if at all possible. Encourage them to get some help. Ask them questions about suicide. Sometimes we kind of worry that if we say to our friend, you know, if we ask them about suicide, we worry, am I putting the thought in my friend's head? Am I, you know, am I being disrespectful, or am I putting the thought in their head? And, you know, somebody who's that depressed, they're already thinking about it. If you ask them direct questions, something like, you know, you've been telling me that you're really depressed, and I got to tell you, I'm worried about you. I'm wondering if you're feeling suicidal. That tells them somebody's listening to me. Somebody cares about me. Somebody's noticing my sadness, and they care and they want to talk. If you don't ask them about their suicidal feelings and they're feeling suicidal, they might interpret your lack of questioning as you're not interested. So you're not putting the thought in their head. They've already thought about it. You're asking direct questions as a way to show that you care. Offer whatever support you can. Know your boundaries, know your limits. Oh, yeah, and then we'll all kind of work together. So, yeah, well-known Latter-day Saints who've had depression, Jeffrey Holland talks about, and some of his talks talked about experiencing terrible depression. President George Albert Smith experienced really bad depression. He just really struggled with that. Again, these things are in that handout that was attached to that email, my sources. Emma Lou Thane, who wrote Where Can I Turn for Peace? She was experiencing depression. She wrote that song because her daughter was experiencing anorexia. And she was really worried about her daughter, and the words and the music came to her. And so she wrote that song, Where Can I Turn for Peace? Marie Osmond wrote a book just on her postpartum depression. So if somebody's experiencing depression, it doesn't mean that they're a bad person. It doesn't mean that they're weak. There's a lot of people who are in their same boat as we see. So I want to kind of move on from just depression in general, and I want to talk about the pandemic that we're going through right now. Because all of the things that we talked about, you know, being lonely and the life stage changes and things like that, that can lend itself to feeling depressed. So I wanted to throw out to you guys, what is it that helps you? What helps you during this COVID pandemic? What has been working for you?
I feel like in the beginning of all of this happening, like early in the spring, we
Yeah.
spent a lot more time doing like video chats and phone calls and like reaching out to family and friends that we just, I guess, like unfortunately take for granted the fact that we can, you know, just call people up or video chat whenever. And it just became so much more important to feel connected to them. And so that, like, just the technology, you know, like I didn't even know Zoom existed, but then all of a sudden we're on it all the time, or on FaceTime or whatever. It's just
Yeah.
been such a blessing to still feel connected and see people's faces and hear their voices when we couldn't do that in person.
Yeah. So doing whatever you can to stay connected absolutely is a great way to help with the blahs, with the depression that comes with COVID pandemic. What about some other ideas? What else do you guys do to manage this? Yeah, go ahead and blurt out. Yeah.
I I feel like it was a blessing. I don't know if it's like this for other people, but being outside makes a huge difference for me. And so I felt like it was like a side blessing that in this area we had a really nice spring,
Yeah.
a pretty pleasant summer, and our fall has been pretty pleasant compared to other years I've been here. And I've been grateful for that, just being outside.
Get that nature outside therapy. That can be really helpful. You know, I'm in for work, I'm at home, and I'm at home for good chunks of the day, and whenever I can, I steal a couple of minutes to go outside and check the mail. And that's really all the time that I have, is to go out and check the mail. But I go out, I get some fresh air, I walk on the grass, you know. That's really just those little things. Good. So what else do people do to cope with the pandemic?
I really enjoy just exercising, just moving my body, whether that's putting on good music and dancing in my own living room with my kids, or just going to the gym. But just moving my body helps me.
Yeah, absolutely. Staying fit. You know, this is the pandemic. The disadvantage is that you stay home and you eat a bunch of sourdough bread or whatever it was that you cooked up to make yourself feel better. And that's fun, but you get the spread. So yeah.
What are those big smiles for, sisters? Sister missionaries are giggling about that.
So what else? What else do you guys do?
The Sunday school answers. I mean, seriously, like, especially not just the pandemic, but other things that are going on in the world right now. It is so nice to have the reassurance from the scriptures and from the modern prophets, and just taking everything into perspective.
Yes, most definitely. Keeping perspective. Yeah, good. One of the things that helps me when I'm feeling down, you know, it's really easy to get overwhelmed with, you got to stay inside. It's over, you know, you can't travel, you can't do this, you can't do that. And what helps me is I have been known to keep like a little journal, a little diary, and I write down all the positive things that I can think of. And that kind of forces my brain out of that negativity bias that my amygdala, my brain, is focusing on. Instead, I kind of try to reroute that by focusing on something positive. You know, these little, like, I call them like little firefly moments. So little things, you know, going outside and walking on the grass, petting your cat and feeling the fur between the, you know, your fingers. Little things like finding a good buy on Twinkies, right? That's a little thing. It's like a little firefly. It's like a little light in your life, and write it down, and just hang on to that, because those are valid. Sometimes we think, oh, it's just a little thing. Why should I pay attention to that? But those little things are important too. So good. What else do you guys do?
Marilyn, you're on mute.
You're muted.
There we go. I said I'm a big sports fan,
Oh, yeah.
and about killed me when I didn't have sports for a while, but now I've got baseball, and I like reading, and I read a lot of coaches' books.
Oh, wow.
And one of my heroes has always been Pat Summitt, who was the legendary women's basketball coach at the University of Tennessee.
Right.
And she has written several books, and I've read each and every one of them. But this past year, with not just John's death, but then the coronavirus and everything that hit kind of all at once, there was one quote, and I've shared this with some of the sisters in the Ralston La Vista ward, that I live by every day. And she said, left foot, right foot, breathe.
Yep.
And sometimes it has to just kind of be simple. We don't need to make things so complicated. If we just think about putting one foot in front of the other and breathing,
Yep.
we can make it.
Yeah. One step at a time. And remember to, I like that left foot, right foot, because you're taking steps,
Yep.
right? Making the effort, but you're also taking care of yourself by breathing. Remember the simple things, the firefly things, just notice the breath. So yeah, excellent. So there's a lot of things that we can do, that we can learn from each other. There's a lot of things in our control. We might not have control over the fact that we have to wear a mask outside. We might not have control over, politics, but there are a lot of things that we do have control over. So kind of stay focused on those things that we do have control over. Notice the little things, get out in nature, go for a walk, read books. There's still options. The Omaha Public Library, I think, opened up this past week, so you could go there. Barnes and Noble has a discount section. So, there's things that we can do that can help us. And I think one big thing that we can do is remember to be gentle with ourselves, to take care of ourselves. It's not a sign of selfishness to take care of yourself. It's not a sign of selfishness to do what you have to do to recharge your batteries. Just like the mask, you have to take care of yourself before you can take care of others. Otherwise you get wiped out. So yeah, good. Did you guys, what were some of your questions or thoughts as we were going through this?
Jennifer, I had one just kind of that I had thought about before that I wanted you to touch on, and it was, what can we do to decrease the stigma that I feel like is so often attached to mental illness? What can we do as individuals when someone we know is struggling?
I think that's a good question. I think, the stigma is that it's not natural or not normal. The stigma is that you're a weak person. I think one of the ways to overcome the stigma is to talk about it and not feel like we have to put on that face of everything's perfect, right? And we can ask questions of people who are depressed and just say, hey, I'm worried about you. Let's talk. Do you want to go for a walk around the neighborhood sometime? So you guys tell me, what else can we do to decrease stigma?
I think if we just can realize that depression is in varying levels is really very common.
Yep.
It's not like, you get the measles once in your life and you're done with them or something.
Right.
I mean, there are times and seasons and whatever that if we realize that we have more in common on this, unfortunately, maybe, but maybe fortunately, because I think we can be more helped that way to, like, for instance, I can relate right now to Neil Greenouch, and hopefully he can relate to me. We've both lost spouses in the last year. So we can find things that we can relate with people on. And, sure, how can I say I haven't been depressed losing my spouse of 50 years, for Pete's sake? So we do have more in common, I think, than we realize at times.
I agree. Yeah, that's good. How else can we destigmatize depression?
Maybe just sharing experiences. I know for me, growing up, I did have the mentality like you should be able to fix your problem or, do whatever. And it wasn't until I had a roommate in college who, from what I could tell, was doing everything right. And I suddenly realized, like, oh, this really isn't just about doing all the right things.
Yep. Yeah, it would be nice if all you had to do was X, Y, and Z, and then you'd be happy. You increase your chances of being happy, but it's not a guarantee that you'll never have those chemical imbalances or that you'll never have that frontal lobe abnormality where you ruminate on things. So, it's not a guarantee. So yeah, I think being open about it and talking about it. Absolutely.
I'll just go ahead and share this quote from Elder Holland because his wisdom is just amazing. I think it was from that same talk, the Broken Vessel talk, but he says, broken minds can be healed just the way broken bones and hearts are healed. While God is at work making those repairs, the rest of us can help by being merciful, non-judgmental, and kind.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like the idea of just being merciful, non-judgmental, and kind, because maybe we were raised with the thought of pull yourself up by your bootstraps.
Mm-hmm.
And then our friend comes to us and our friend is depressed. It would be really easy to go back to that myth and say, well, what you need to do is you need to do X, Y, and Z and try to solve the problem for them and give them advice and tell them to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. So, and sometimes we just need to be quiet and just listen. And sometimes we need to ask. So yeah, good.
I shared on Facebook today a quote from one of it was from Dr. Luke Norquist, one of his nurse practitioners. It's not her quote, but it says, just because someone carries it well doesn't mean it isn't heavy.
Yeah.
So I think, as I said, I think we need to find our common ground and realize that a lot of people are carrying some heavy burdens. And even though we can't fix it, I think listening and just being there.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, good point. So yeah, other thoughts? Well, yeah, just we went way over. Sorry about that.
I know, it's fine.
But so yeah, sorry about that. Maybe you could still catch the tail end of the debates if that.
Marilyn's recording them, so
yeah, I'm recording. So if anyone really is see them, I have them recorded.
I'm kidding, but yeah. So I'm sorry I went over, but any last questions or thoughts or anything you want to add or anything?
I just had a really quick question. In your lesson that you're talking about how it helps to talk about it, is that the same if you don't have someone to talk about it with, maybe like journaling it? I've heard the power of journaling. Do you know if that's similar or the same power or?
That's a good question about the effectiveness of journaling. There's actually been research studies done on the effectiveness of journaling. Journaling is really good at treating depression. It can be harmful if you are somebody who ruminates and has obsessive compulsive disorder. If you are OCD and you stress about things and you ruminate and ruminate and ruminate, when you go to journal, you're going to write all that same stuff down. So instead of journaling, if you have those OCD traits, instead of journaling, maybe write it down, put it in a box, lock the box, and go do something else. Depressed people, it helps them to write it out. It kind of clears their mind and gets things kind of structured. So it's kind of it's got some advantages and disadvantages.
So would advantage also be like writing, like what you were doing, of just writing just the positives or something? Is that?
Yeah, like my, I keep a journal whenever I'm feeling kind of crummy. When I'm feeling kind of crummy, all I notice are the negatives, that negativity bias with my little amygdala is going off, right? So all I do is I notice the negatives. And I found that I have to force myself to look at the positive. I have to get in my little journal and I have to write down, found a good sale on Twinkies, right? Yay for Twinkies. So I write that down, or I write down, I was doing some work and I turned on YouTube and YouTube suggested this song and I've never heard this song before and I love this song and it only lasted 3 minutes, but it made my day. So you have to write down or at least talk to somebody about these positives to help you to stay focused on that, because they're there and they're just as valid as the negative stuff too. So yeah, absolutely.
I
Yeah.
just wanted to, oh, sorry, go ahead. Go ahead, Lindy.
No, I just have like a general question about therapists. Like, I don't really know what's the difference between like a psychologist and a what's the other, like, psychiatric, or I don't know.
Psychiatrist.
Psychiatrist. There we go. Thank you.
So that's a good question. A psychiatrist is a medical doctor, and they can prescribe meds, and sometimes they do therapy, but usually a psychiatrist just does medication management, or they might, advise you to eat a more healthy diet. They might focus more on the biology part, the psychiatrist.
Like the diagnosis would come from a psychiatrist, right?
Yeah. And a psychologist has a PhD in psychology, and they typically do just therapy. They don't do the medication stuff. So it's common that you would go see a doctor and the doctor says, okay, I'm going to write you out a script for your meds. You also need to go see a therapist. So a psychologist has a PhD, a doctorate in psychology. You could also see a different kind of a therapist. It might be like, I was a psychotherapist. I don't have a PhD, I have a master's, but I could still do therapy. You could go see a social worker, and they also can do therapy. So slightly different education and slightly different, majors, so to speak, but they all kind of do stuff like that. So, yeah.
I just wanted to share one resource that I found in addition to the ones that you had listed, Jennifer. I was exploring the Gospel Library the other day, and there's a section called Life Help. And if you open that up, there's a section on mental health. And it has some information on just general principles. Then there's like help for me, help for parents, how can I help someone else, and then where to learn more. So I just wanted to make everyone aware of that resource as well.
Yeah, good. Good. Yeah, these are all good thoughts. So I received, people have asked me, what's the way to help other people? If you live with somebody who's depressed, how can you help them? So be supportive, but keep that mask on yourself first. Take good care of yourself first. Have good boundaries. If they get angry, don't let them get, take it out on you. Certainly keep yourself safe. Encourage them, might be something like, hey, I know you're feeling really crummy. Let's go for a walk. I'll walk with you. I'd love to go for a walk with you. Do you need somebody to go with you to see a therapist? I'd be glad to go with you if you want. Just that kind of support. If they are feeling suicidal, if you get the sense that they're suicidal, but you're not sure, it's completely okay to say, you've been talking about feeling really depressed lately. I'm wondering if you're thinking about suicide. And that can be a way for them to speak up. If you have a loved one, especially one that you're living with, that is feeling depressed, you can share with them what you learned in this presentation. You can say, I went to this presentation and I learned that a lot of times it's due to our brain, and it's not that you're a bad person. And maybe I can help you out. Maybe I can help you make an appointment to go see a doctor. Maybe, I'll go with you. Remember to take good care of yourself and to realize that you, as much as you want to, you can't fix them. All you can do is take care of yourself. So, and be there for that person. You can do your best, but you can't make them go to therapy. You can just do your best with that. So, yeah. So, other ideas about how to help a loved one who's really super depressed.
As hard as it is, there have been times I've had to walk away for a while.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's hard, especially when it's a loved one. But sometimes you just got to let them draw some of their own conclusions a little bit. And if you're there doing everything for them, sometimes that's not the answer either.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear that. And sometimes the way to step back is not necessarily to end the relationship. It might
Right.
be, maybe if it's your spouse, it could be, I have to take care of myself. I need to go for a walk. If you want to stay home and you don't want to go for a walk, that's okay. I need to get out. And I need some space for me. I need to go to a therapist and talk about my issues in dealing with somebody who's depressed. So yeah, definitely do what you can to take good care of yourself. I know I went way over. I'm so sorry. So
Oh, this was great, Jennifer.
Yeah, it really was. Thank you so much. Mm.
is there anything else? Any other questions? Thoughts? Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Jennifer, for your time and your preparation. This was such an informative and helpful presentation, and I'm grateful for the opportunity that we'll have to share it with others, along with your resources that you gave us. So thank you again.
Yeah.
Really appreciate it. Let's go ahead and close with a prayer. Sarah, would you say that for us? If you're still there.
Who?
Sarah, all right, I'm gonna pick on Claire instead.
Sure.
Thanks.
Yeah. Our Heavenly Father, we are so grateful that we could be able to meet together via technology, to be able to use this tool that Thou hast given us to be able to build up Thy kingdom and be able to connect us and strengthen others. We're so grateful for Jennifer's knowledge and for the gift that she has to be able to convey her thoughts well, and knowledge to disperse it to us so that we can better understand those going through depression. If we ourselves are, that we can help ourselves. Please help those that feel sad at this time, that they may be comforted, and that if we feel prompted to help those that feel sad at this time, that we can act on those promptings and reach out to them simply and help them feel loved, help them feel Thy love. We're grateful for this gospel and for the knowledge and comfort it gives us. And we say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thanks everybody for participating.